please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello, Internet. I've got a good one for you tonight. Today, this morning, wherever you may be, this afternoon. Goeiemiddag. Have you heard of Angola? I bet you have. Have you heard of Angola in the state of Indiana in the good old US of A? Well, I have, and I'm going to introduce you to somebody who actually lives there. Rhodesian by birth, served in the Rhodesian Army, then came down to South Africa, did a few bits and pieces in the South African Army, and then did other bits and pieces all over the place, and now resides in the US of A in Angola. So I'm going to welcome here Peter Baxter. Thanks for volunteering to come and chat with us. It's all yours. You tell us what you want to tell us and share what you want to share. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence.
I'd like to say thanks to you and Course. Excuse my voice, everybody, but I want to thank you guys because you are putting together our history. And a lot of people don't talk about what we've done, where we've done, and how we've done it over time. So thank you so much. And I'd like to really extend my gratitude to you guys. And I know that you'll do a great job of putting this together. Let me start at the beginning. So I was born in Fort Victoria in Rhodesia in 1962. When I was 17, which was June of 1979, I signed up with the RLI. And they would only let me go into the RLI in January of 1980, which was the next intake. So I went to do that. I then did a National Service Officers Course in Bulawayo. I did a Regular Army Officers Selection Board in Gwelo. I was accepted for that, and then I did that, and I was commissioned into the Rhodesian Army, which was then changed to Zimbabwe on the 26th of September 1980. Great day, proud day. I was very lucky because I was schooled in probably one of the best counterinsurgency armies in the world. And that stood me in good stead for my further endeavors later on. So after that, I served with 3 RAR, which was a newly formed battalion out of the independent companies. And we still were hunting terrorists and chasing them down and running around Rhodesia, or Zimbabwe as it was called then, to stop the insurgents or terrorists from running out of all the assembly points and so on. So we saw a lot of action doing that. I then served in Namtali at the HQ of 3RAR. It was then changed in about October 1981 to 33 Infantry Battalion. By that stage, I got posted to the School of Infantry, which was in Gwelo, and I was sent to do a management course to get promoted, and I actually ended up running 3 of those courses and promoting ex-terrorists into colonels and brigadiers and all that sort of thing. So as a lowly lieutenant, I was doing that, and then the next minute they said I needed to run the Regular Officers Course in the first Zimbabwean Army Regular Officers Course. So I started doing that, and then position became untenable. So I'd already been down to South Africa. I'd had an interview in Pretoria with Alf Logan, who became a recruiting man for the Rhodesians for South Africa. And I accepted a posting to 121 Battalion with the Zulus. For me, it was a fantastic time. Having been schooled by the RAR troops, having had some action in Rhodesia stroke Zimbabwe, that just kept me and my interest in the military going, and I'd always wanted to be a soldier. So I moved down to 121 Battalion after having spoken to Alf, accepted the contract, got on a train in Pretoria and went down to Durban. Then I got taken to Matuba, which is where the base was, and I was a 2-pip lieutenant. Taken in, I served with B Company first, which was run by Captain Chris Garland, an ex-Rhodesian. There was another young South African officer, Lieutenant Chris Gunter there, and there were many other national service and also permanent force officers in the area. So it was a cool time. I mean, 1982 April to 84, I served with them. I went out for about a 3 or 4 month period, And then I went back again in 85 or end of 84 to 85. And then I finally left the military, still as a lieutenant. So 121 Battalion was platoon commander, first of 7 platoon. Chris Garland and his company sergeant major, Staff Sergeant Pete Curley, who was ex-Salute Scouts, put the company together. I trained 7 platoon. We passed them out. We got them set up, and they eventually went to the border and did their thing. At the end of 82, I also had the itch, so I decided that I would go and do recce selection. So I trained for about 4 months prior to recce selection. I went to the Bluff. I was then taken back to Duku, which is right next to 121 Battalion's base. I did recce selection. There were probably about 100 of us there, 3 officers. There was myself, Lieutenant David Light, who was ex-British para, went to Rhodesia, served in the Armored Car Squadron, went to South Africa, did recce selection, eventually went to 3-2 Battalion and was killed in an incident where his CO made a grave blunder and they walked into a huge ambush. So he was killed there, unfortunately. The other lieutenant was Ami Postma, and then myself, and then there were about 95, 98 different corporals, riflemen, skitters, etc. They were all based in there trying to do selection to get into special forces as opposed to going to an infantry unit as a norm. There were a couple of good guys there as well in the corporal side of things. Yanni Wools, Rassi Erasmus, both became good qualified operators, both excellent guys. And I was the only guy, believe it or not, who had an R1 on that course. Everybody else had G3s because they were expendable. So when we came to do the rifle grenades and all the rest of it, my R1 did all the work for 100 people plus. So it was quite an entertaining time. There were a few of the troopers who did pretty well. Slanders was one of them. I'm trying to think of one of the other guys. Yaffe. I can't remember his first name, but Rifleman Yaffe, he went through, became an operator eventually. Good guy. So we did the selection. We went through. We did our endurance for the selection phase. We did all the dromdra. I sent you some pictures of dromdra and also the interrogation of that. I'd been interrogated on my officer's course in Rhodesia, so I knew what was coming, and it's not fun, especially in Matuba where the temperature runs to about 50 degrees, and when they use the water jug on your neck, they use it with ice inside it. So you can hear the ice rattling for minutes before they come, and you're already shivering by the time it gets there. Anyhow, it was a great selection. They were very good instructors. The major in charge was a good guy. The Sergeant Major, Carl Lutz, an ex-SAS guy, was a great guy. Ray Godbeer, Staff Sergeant. Sergeant James Taitger, recce qualified, great guy, just retired recently. Wayne Ross Smith was another one. And I got through the course, and I finished it at the end. I was let down on my shooting scores, but that also, I think, had a lot to do with the fact that you didn't have a personal rifle that you used all the time. And that, you know, when they gave you the Berettas or the MAGs or anything like that, you didn't know how to sight it in. But anyway, I eventually passed the course and I finished at the end. And at the interviews, I just said, oh, no, you're a bit young to be an officer, because I was only 19 at that stage. And, you know, for the recce's, we'd rather have someone who's a lot more mature. And I said, okay. And he took me to Commandant Kinghorn, and we talked, and Commandant Kinghorn said the same thing and said, oh, we'd take you as a corporal if you wanted to. So I said to him, Commandant, thanks very much. I worked very hard to get my 2 pips, and I'm not going to take the offer up. I was stupid because I should have taken the offer. I wanted to do paracourse, and I'd had a chance in Rhodesia, but because of operational, they wouldn't let me do it. And then again in South Africa, I've done the recce course. I'm now super fit, could have walked through the paracourse, and I didn't. But anyway, that's past history, but I had a great time. It was a great experience. So once that was finished, I went back in December of 82 to 121 Battalion. And when I got there, the Commandant John Quinn said to me, oh, Peter, you've got a great background, so I want you to bring up the next company for us. So he then put me in charge of raising Charlie Company, training them from selection right through to finish, so they could then go out to the border and do all of that. So I did that, and that was a great experience. I went to the border. with A Company right at the beginning. So that was about early 83. One of my friends, National Service Lieutenant Gordon Richards, had his leg cut off in a buffalo accident, unfortunately. So I ended up as the company 2RC and running his platoon. It was an interesting time. We got to see a few SWAPO running around, but we never got to engage with them, just based on the fact that we just walked patrol all the time. And we didn't have quick reaction, which is what the Kufut guys were doing and what 101 eventually ended up doing as well. So we did that. It was an interesting time. It was also difficult adjusting to how discipline in the SADF worked, because the discipline code was so ancient. I mean, when you were dealing with black troops like the Zulus, for example, the discipline code had been written in 1912, and it was still fined in shillings and pence and whatever else the money was at the time. But what was difficult about administering it was there was no detention barracks to send them to or do anything. So if a guy went AWOL, he got punished, and they used sandbag PT on it. For me, that was more of a demoralizer than actually a punishment for them. And I found it to be difficult to understand. It was quite entertaining because, being a professional soldier, one day one of the staff sergeants turned around and said to me, he said, "Oh, Lieutenant, in the bar one night, he said, I'll have you on orders and out on a sandbag before you know what hit you." And I looked at him and I said, "Staff, let me tell you, I'm a professional soldier. I'm not a national serviceman. You try that, you'll have a 9mm right between your eyes." And he backed off and left me alone after that. So you learn what to do, what and where to do it. But I loved the Zulu Battalion. That was really great experience. I went again to the border with my own company, with Charlie Company. Eventually, I went another time. We also operated in Napara, and also went to Ndumu Game Reserve on the Mozambique border. So it was a really entertaining time. What I did realize was that eventually I would end up having to go and do courses and so on, and I wasn't fluent in Afrikaans, which was also a downfall for me. I'd learned it when I was a kid, when I lived in Joburg, but not particularly well. So at the Zulus, we spoke English all the time. And eventually, when I ended up with 101, I learned very quickly to speak Afrikaans. We went to Napara. It was a very interesting time because Colonel Dion Ferreira was in charge of Sector 20. And I arrived in Rundu, and I was told that I had to bring a standard infantry company. And I arrived there with 3 platoons. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, Lieutenant, you've got a great show ahead of you in Afrikaans." And I said, "Colonel, sorry, I don't really speak Afrikaans. Can you fill me in on it?" He says, "Oh, no problem." He says, "You've got 5 bases you've got to run." He said, "You're going to have a bit of a problem because your 3 platoons should have a platoon in each base." So it was quite entertaining. So my company sergeant major, a guy called Johnny Parker, who had a really great sense of humor, and my young lieutenants, we all banded together and said, "Okay, we'll sort this out. It doesn't matter. It's, you send a platoon out, take a couple of extra guys out of each section, and then you do what you do." So we ended up covering the 4 bases outside of Napara, and then we had Napara to look after as well. Fortunately, Kavango wasn't really a big incursion area for SWAPO. So in the time that we were there, we didn't really have any contacts or anything. And it was lucky because my base at Napara actually ended up with me, the company sergeant major, and 6 signalers. That's all that was in the base all the time. And when me and the sergeant major went out to check on the bases, the CSM, we drove out in the biffle, had an MAG on top. I was the driver, he was the gunner, and off we went and checked on the bases. So it was quite an entertaining time. But we did our full 3 months. We did the whole job, and we made sure that no one was skulking around in the bushes there. So that was pretty good fun. When I'd finished that, I went back to 121 and eventually decided in 1985 that I needed to go and hone my skills on other things. So prior to being in the military in Rhodesia, I'd driven a truck for my dad. I'd done cement hauling. I'd done a few other bits and pieces along the way. But I also wanted to broaden my horizon. So I left the Zulus at that stage. So I'd done 3.5 years with them. And I went to Cape Town. And my dad had asked me to go down there. And it was an interesting time. So I became a restaurant manager, and I worked for a thing that's a direct copy of McDonald's called McMunch. And that was a cool exercise because I learned a whole lot, especially with my Rhodesian Army training of how to account for rations, running bars, all that sort of thing. It was a pretty easy move into it. Unfortunately, the business that we worked in had a partner that wasn't particularly straight, and they were filching money out of it, and it eventually went bang. So I then decided, okay, what am I going to do next? And I hunted around, and eventually I worked for Southern Life for General Leon Jacobs from the Rhodesian Army in the security section for a little period of time. I drove a taxi for an old age home in Cape Town. I drove different vehicles for drivers galore. I went and worked at a spur for a period of time. It was all just great experience. I met my wife there, which was great. Kathleen and I have been married since February 1988. She's been my rock, and she's such a great asset to me, and has also been part of my adventures around the world. So once that had taken place, I always reflected back on my 121 battalion period. That training, that company was great fun. The training of B Company and C Company, going to the border, going to Ndumu on the Mozambican border, all those sort of things just created a whole great atmosphere. All the guys used to go fishing all the time, whether it's in Lucia as well, because that's just down the road. So everyone would go to work at 6 a.m, finish your work at 4, and then all head off to the beach and go fishing, which was pretty good. We went into Kentron in the test ranges areas there quite often as well. So that, it was a really good experience. All the driving the different vehicles, teaching the troops, training them from the start to the finish. There was a major who came in and taught us, and his name was Ace, and he said to me, Peter, he said, man, I've seen a guy who can shoot, you could shoot. He said, I really think you should start doing Bisley and that sort of thing. He said, but more importantly, you're able to teach African soldiers to shoot, because that's one of the hardest things that we find around. So he took me and showed me what to do and where to do it. This guy was incredible. I mean, he had an old Lee Enfield 303, and he could put 10 rounds through that thing faster than you could pull a trigger on an R1, So he was good, and it was a great experience from that. 121 on the people management side of things was also a really good experience. Being a young lieutenant and being allowed to run a company, which was the major's job, and teaching and training them, that just added to your maturity and your responsibility. So back in Rhodesia, I'd had my first contact in June of 1979 before I even got into the army. My dad owned the Zimbabwe Ruins Hotel, and he went away one day, and I had some guard force guys there, and they said, you want to come for a patrol with us? And sure, we had a contact. It was pretty cool. So, military's been in my blood and all that for a long time. Once I'd finished my work at Spur and all that, I went touring overseas, and I went there for about 6 or 8 weeks on my own. It was a different thing. I'm not cut out to go and sit and lie on beaches and watch the world go by. So I then came back, and while I was working for Southern Life, got bored and decided, no, I'll go back to the SADF for a while and let me see what I can do. I then signed up, and I was accepted as a lieutenant to go to 101 Battalion in Ondangwa, and I ended up in the reaction force teams. So there were 4 reaction force teams: 901 Special Service Company, 902, 903, and 904. Each team had 4, or each company had 4 teams. All the teams were generally run by lieutenants. So Lieutenant Bernie Duval was my company commander in 902 when I first got there. I got there on May the 21st of 1987. First guy I met was the RSM Chris Skitter. I sent you his photo. He was an ex-4 recce guy, good man. And he realized I didn't speak much Afrikaans, so he threw me a little bit of English and said, listen, this is what you do, go here, go there. And by the Monday of that following week, I was already in the bush with Romeo Mikes 7 and Duval. So it was a great experience. I had a corporal called Pine Pinar, who actually, believe it or not, lives in America, in Georgia. His father is a professor at a university, so he speaks Afrikaans with an American accent. And you must see how the Avambas used to pull his chain, because African soldiers can take the mickey out of anybody. But Pine was a great worker, and incredibly hard taskmaster, but also very clever in what he did tactically, and also incredibly amazing with his hands on changing Casspir engines in the bush and queerfulls and diffs and whatever else you name it. So Pine and I are still in a bit of contact every now and again here in the US. Eventually, so I'd been there from the 21st of May. We went and did a couple of operations out. The general rule for us, we'd go out 6 weeks and come back for 10 days. That was sort of the norm. We went out, we were operating around, excuse me, on Jiva. And we were on a follow-up one morning of some tours. And while we were running, Duval was on the spur with some troops, and he hit the bomb's head and got a lot of shrapnel in his legs. Now, Duval is an incredibly talented Army commander. Tactically wise, super intelligent. He'd been with Romeo Mike, or the Romeo Mikes at 101 from, I think, about 1982, 83. So he knew a lot about it. His original team was Romeo Mike 2. Really nice guy, and he's become a super great friend of mine. And as you know, Fossey, you only pick up your really greatest friends when you're in the military. That's just how life works. So Duval hit the bomb's head that day. We also had a troop who tried to commit suicide using an M79 grenade launcher. And the troop didn't remember from his training that it took 3.5 meters for the thing to arm. So he had this big wad in there. So Duval had taken off with the 4 trackers who were injured in the bomb's head in the Puma. And the next thing, this troop tried to pop himself. His name was Dion Guinness, J. Dion Guinness. So I called the chopper back, and the chopper arrives, and we just told him, no, he's got something in his throat. We don't know what it is. Because if we told the pilot it was an M79 grenade live, he would have said, no, you just leave him on the ground. You can drive him home. So we put him in the helicopter, and they took him back. And Colonel Velkenwood and Major Van Lille, very brave guys as well, went and took the the M79 head out of the guy in the Ondangwa sick bay. They all knew, it was inert because the arming mechanism hadn't actually gone. So brave guys to do it anyway. So I ended up then running 902 in Duval's vehicle and running the company, and did it. And I did it for a couple of months, and I eventually ended up with 903 with me for a while. So between July the 7th and September the 26th, Duval was off, and he was in the hospital getting bits of metal taken out his feet and legs and arms and whatever else. So he didn't come back until, I think, about the 22nd of September. We did a lot of operations. We went out, we sat out on the road between Onjiva and Zongongo. We had 106s mounted on a couple of the Casspirs. We used to make sure that the convoys couldn't get through to Onjiva. So we spent a lot of time sitting on the side of the road, spotting when they came. Then you'd fire a 106, 2.5 or 3 kilometers at them, and they'd all turn around and disappear back to Onjiva and Zongongo. So that was entertaining. What also interested me was how much power a Germany had, for example. So we had a Germany with us with 903 and 902 out. We were just north of Onjiva. And one Sunday morning, he says to me, no, Peter, his name was Casspirs. He says, you got to have a church parade this morning. I looked at him, I said, Germany, there's no chance. I said, you can George Marshal with me, you can do whatever you want. I'm not putting 240 guys out on a parade, doing a church parade in the middle of enemy territory, Indian territory. It's just not the right thing to do. Anyway, him and I became quite good friends after a while. And I did a lot of other operations where we supported Mike Fox, which was our pseudo teams. So we had Mike Fox was part of the Romeo Mikes, but they were a pseudo company. And what they did was they dress up as tours and run into an area, and we would stay 5, 6, 7 kilometers away and then run in there to go and help them if there was a big contact or if there was a big follow-up needed or something. So we were lying around for days and days waiting for this. And I taught this. The other guys at 101 were a lot of national service lieutenants. We ended up with Peter Cordier, young guy, Donnie. Who else did we have? Michael McCann, Rob McClelland. There were a whole lot of very good ones. And they were all national service guys, but who wanted to come and fight. So they didn't want to go and sit and do a base job and sit in the background. There were a lot of corporals amongst them. We had team leaders as corporals. So Romeo Mike 1 was run by a corporal by the name of Chris Damas, super experienced operator, really, really good, very good with the troops. very good at what he did, very good at follow-ups. Him and Duval probably had the most kills out of all the 101 Romeo Mike teams and companies along the way. There was Vesey van der Westhuizen. Dan van Rensburg was Romeo Mike 8's platoon sergeant. Dan and I are still very good friends. We talk a lot. Often when I go back to South Africa, there has to be a night me and Dan go out and go and have a few beers, and that's just how life is. So one of those pictures that I sent to you, where there's me sitting with a beard and a guy to the right of me, that's Dan van Rensburg, the guy on the right. That was when we were in the East. So we did a whole lot of operations. I remember going out with Chris Skitter the one night when Juliet Lima, one of the majors, had gone and attacked Anhanka, and me and the RSM had to drive Bundubash all night from the Haag through to Anhanka to go and see if there was anything after they'd attacked them, if there was any ammo or weapons to take away. So we did that. Chris Kitter's a good guy. Riding around in the bush at night's a different thing. He had a Cespa, so he had the one with the 4 wheels at the front, and all the rest of us had the 2 wheels. So we always ended up with punches. And there were a few other things. We operated around Mupa a lot, Yonde, those sort of areas. It was a great time, great, interesting. The Avambo troops as trackers were fantastic. Generally, their discipline was very good. There's one incident I'll tell you about later in the East, which wasn't a great one. They generally buckled under the discipline that we put on them. The Romeo Mikes were a very close-knit society. For example, the 2 captains who ran companies was Harry Hermanson. He was very good, but he eventually had to transfer and go to staff course and all that. There was Reg van Rooyen, who ran 903 Special Service Company, which I went into command in January of 1988. And Reg moved out eventually. But apart from that, there was Sace Prinsloo, John Lombard, Duval, and myself, basically, who ran the companies there. So it was quite interesting. We were all full lieutenants, 2 lieutenants, and that's how it ended up running. Now, one of the other captains, Andries Rademacher, who got killed in firewood on the 31st of October, 87, he wanted to join the Romeo Mikes, and he turned around and he said, you guys, you do the initiation, you do the whole works with it, and you put me in. And he was a great guy, what a good operator as well, eventually, I believe. So that firewood operation was October of 87. 101 Battalion lost, I think, 13 or 14 guys killed that day. The Paras lost 4. It was a difficult operation, and apparently we went and attacked the same place on the same axes as before, which I don't think was a great idea, but we were sitting at Quita Quanavali at that time, so we didn't really know much about it. Mupa was an interesting area to operate around. There's a beautiful church there, which was untouched by the war, actually. And the only thing that had happened is originally in about 82, some of the National Service guys took the cross and the priest's scarf out of there. It was a Catholic mission. And eventually, I know Roland de Vries gave it back to them. But we used to operate around there. We hit landmines and got our water down at the river there, and etc. So that was pretty good. Well, fast forward a few bits of time. We went to the Panekis Vlaktes, which was north of Etosha, so a very big open area that we used to go and do our basic battle drill training, because being motorized infantry, it's a lot faster than if you're on your feet. So we went down there the one day, and Dan van Rensburg had got one of the troops who was giving him a bit of lip, and he gave him some Sunsuck PT, and the troops were super upset about this. And it ended up with Arthur Norval, who's also another great guy, who went to school with Dan, standing on top of the Casspir with an R5 with 50 rounds on it, said, the troops you touch and you die. But that was the sort of thing you had to do. You were dealing with pretty much professional soldiers at the end of the day, and they didn't really go to the sandbag PT type of problem all the time. That was quite interesting. We also learned what was called a fire belt action, or a viergordel actie, where what you did when you were running with your Casspirs, you always ran in single file. And if you needed to, you would turn left or right if you got ambushed and run into the enemy, full guns blazing. So one of the pictures I sent you was the armory of a typical Romeo Mike team. There were 45 3.0 Brownings in that picture, and probably about a 6 or 8 5.0 Brownings. And then you had all the MAGs and any other PKMs and R5s, R4s with 50 round magazines on, on the Casspirs. So there was a lot of firepower. And what would happen is you'd swing left or swing right, stop and open fire with everything that you had. Well, it was quite impressive, and it saved us a lot of times when we went to Quitaquanavali, where we were fighting with tanks, and we only had Ratel 90s with us as the tank protection as such. So that was quite interesting to learn that. Anyhow, I went back to South Africa in middle of September, somewhere around there, for my 10 days R&R when we got back from one of the trips. And I got engaged to my wife, Kathleen, then. And then I came back on the 26th of September, and I got onto the plane with young Lieutenant Dion Boiters, who was also a great youngster, national service guy. And Dion and I got on the Flossie in Cape Town and flew to Ondangwa, did the little spiral thing, dropped down to the earth and jumped out. And in the blazing sunlight, there's Deval with a big smile on his face. And he looks at me and says in Afrikaans to me, "Hey, Peter, you better go and get your rifle and your pack, because you and me are going to the east tonight." I said, "Okay, well, thanks a lot. I appreciate the heads up." So I went back to my bungalow. I went and got my rifle and got my pack and packed my, I wear an overall. I don't like wearing bronze and a belt around my waist. So I had an overall that I used, a Tiffy's overall that I'd adapted for myself. Had my overall, a couple of pairs of socks, a couple of pairs of underjocks and rations. And I made sure that I had about 6 months supply of cigarettes, and headed back to the airfield. And we then got into this aeroplane. And the 26th of September is always a date to note, because I was commissioned on the 26th of September in 1980. And 26th September of 1987, here's me and Deval in a Flossie flying at night time to go to Mavinga and go and fight Fapla on the Quito front. So we get into this aeroplane, we get all our troops loaded up. My team didn't go, so Romeo Mikes 7 was left behind. They were actually on leave at that time, or vacation. And I ended up running Romeo Mikes 6 because Michael McCann had missed the Flossie coming from Cape Town that day. So off I went. I was the team commander for Romeo Mikes 6, me and Deval, and the whole company, 902 and 903 went. And we went and relieved 901 and 904 that were already there. So 901 and 904 had a pretty good amount of action. And on the 13th of September, the first T-55s crossed the Lomba River. And that's when the Ratel ZT3 missiles were used to shoot them out. So Major Hannes Nordman, great guy, great soldier, very brave, fearless actually, and a great leader and a good man manager. He eventually got the ZT3 missiles, and he shot 3 tanks out on the Lomba. So there's some pictures that I included for you in that you can show on that. One of them's got Deval standing next to it a few days later. And we flew into Mavinga. We were then loaded into Quairful hundreds. And we bundu bashed our way about 60 or 70 kilometers from Mavinga to the Lomba River to go and take over the positions that our sister companies were in. That was a rough ride that night. And the other thing was, everyone was sitting there thinking, damn, we ride around in Casspirs, and if you hit a landmine, you're not going to get hurt. You hit a landmine in one of these things, we're all going to get hurt. Anyhow, we arrived there at about 5:30 in the morning. Sun was just starting to come up. And basically what happened, the leader group from the 901 and 904 came out, and they basically told us what they had, where they had, what they had vehicles-wise, what ammo was there, etc. And we took our troops, and they walked out with their troops, and we walked straight in, and we sat in the trenches on the Lomba right opposite 21 Brigade. The 3 tanks were still out in the Anhara, and there were still plenty of dead bodies floating around there that were lying in the shaunas. That created quite a lot of sickness for a lot of people. Anyhow, we go in, we sit down, we've got 5-0s on tripods watching the world go by. The CSIR guys brought in ground shots, or Casspirs with speakers on top, and they had the jackals yowling, and they were telling the Fapla guys in Portuguese how to do and what to do. Our troops didn't like that. You know, African soldiers are quite superstitious. So when they heard the hyenas and the jackals and all this, so they was like, oh, hold on, no, Lieutenant, what's going on here? Anyhow, it carried on for a few nights. They got mortared every now and again. They got the G5s shot at them. They didn't try and cross the Lomba again where we were. And we went out to go look at those tanks one of the days just for interest sakes. I mean, that ZT3 is an incredible missile. Hannes Nordman and his young National Service crew who were in the ZT3s did a great job. There's a recording on YouTube if you want to find it, to listen to it, when they shot out those 3 tanks using the ZT3s. By all accounts, the first 4 missiles all went either too high or down and into the ground. They withdrew a little bit, reloaded again, went out, and the next 3, wham, they hit all the tanks. So it was pretty cool. And when you go out and go and look at it, one of them had blown the turret of the tank right off the tank. So you can imagine the force of those missiles. Anyhow, it was really cool. We ended up as what was called Combat Group Bravo. And we had basically 3 teams of Casspirs with 902 and 3 teams with 903. And we were the infantry part of the 3-2 mech armored wing, which was 8 Ratel 90s and 4 ZT3 missiles. And Hannes Nordman had a command Ratel with a 5.50 Browning on it. So that was us, and we learned to work with them. We went down, we did patrols up and down the Lomba River. 3rd of October was when 6-1 mech obliterated 47 Brigade. When that happened, the SAM-8 that was captured, I was sent to go and escort down south with a Major Lehman from the Air Force. The UNITA guys were so intent on getting a hold of it, because by them selling it to the Americans would put a huge amount of cash into their pockets. And of course, we as the South Africans wanted to make sure we got it away, because we could study it first and then sell it to the Americans to pay for our war effort. Yeah, my team only had 3 Casspirs because one of them had been shot out. So I inherited Romeo Mikes 14 vehicles. So I had 14 Alpha, 14 Bravo, and 14 Charlie had been shot out. So I had 60 guys between the 3 Casspirs already. And then the Quail that they gave me also had oil leaks and all that all the time. So I had quite a good supply of diesel and ATF fluid and brake fluid and all the rest. Every drop of what I had got used to get that SAM-8 about 40 or 50 kilometers south, so they could then load it onto a transporter and take it out to South Africa. And that was an interesting experience. We drove only at night. We had to sit up on top of that thing, cut all the trees because you didn't want to damage any of the superstructure on top. It was full of holes. When I talk full of holes, you'll see in that photograph I put up for you how many holes it had. The tires were shot out. We just pumped air all the time from the Quails and the Casspirs. It was crazy. Anyhow, we got that done and then went back. We stayed at the Lomba for a little while. During that period, I ended up swallowing a fly there. 4 days, I was like dead underneath my Casspir. But it was good times, very interesting. The troops were well orientated. We were not conventional troops. We were coin warfare troops. So all of us used to wear shorts. Well, I didn't wear shorts, but you'd have all the leader group, and the soldiers would wear shorts themselves. When they carried their weapons, it was 50-round magazine, 435s, no water bottles, no nothing like that. So it was entertaining. We got dragged into a couple of attacks behind 6-2 mech, behind 6-1 mech. One of them, I think it was around the 9th or 10th of November, we were the rear guard or the reserve force. Combat Group Bravo was the reserve for 6-2 mech. Colonel Leon Maria was commanding it. And our 6-2 mech went off target, and we ended up running right into the main force that day. On the way there, we'd seen 2 brand new Brazilian trucks, which had Fapla troops just jump out and debus. And the boss said to me, he said, "What do you think they are?" I said, "No, I think they're Fapla." He said, "Me too." So when they saw us, they jumped in the trucks and they were gone before we could even get close enough to engage with them. But on the way to that big contact, we had the snipers shooting at us with Dragunovs out of the trees. So you were driving along in your Casspirs, watching where we were going. Again, we're the rear guard, or the reserve force, and you hear this ping as the bullets are going over your head. One of my ex-Rhodesian corporals, Tess Kamala, who retired as a sergeant major a couple of months ago out of the SADF, Tess kept calling me and saying, "Lieutenant, you better duck. They're going to hit you if you keep sitting outside." I said, "No, if I don't look outside, I don't know where they are. What are we going to do then?" Anyhow, we drove along and we ended up right in this main force of the Fapla Brigade. I think it was 16 Brigade we were trying to trap. And I was parked up on the front of the trenches. And there was a Ratel 90 on the right of me, and a couple of Casspirs on the left, and another Caspir on the right of that Ratel 90. And there was a BM-21 through the bushes that I could see, which started elevating in our direction and started firing BM-21 rockets at us. So I took it out with a 5.0, and when that thing cooked off, all of the rockets spun around on the floor, and it was like Guy Fawkes, like fireworks day. And then this young Ratel 90 gunner next to me, there was a tank further on inside there, and I could see it, but everything I told him on the radio, he just could not see it. So I jumped off my Casspir and I jumped on the thing and I showed him where it was so that he could try and engage it, but the tank withdrew as he started firing it. I got back on my Casspir. We were firing at these kids in the trenches. I mean, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. They dug these huge, deep trenches so we couldn't drive through them. So we were stuck up on the side and you're just shooting at anything that moves inside on there. It was quite an intense day that day. So a fair share of experience of that. We did part of the attack on late November, or where we were supposed to go and attack them at the Chumbinga Bridge where they were trying to cross over. That was a lemon again. They'd all run over the river by that stage. So it was interesting. We had a whole lot of other contacts as well, where you were driving through the dense bush trying to engage the Fapla brigades, and they'd fire mortars at you and that sort of thing. So the Casspirs are all open on top. So you see all the Ratel guys duck and put their hatches down, and all the rest of us are sitting there waiting for a mortar to arrive inside one of the Casspirs. Luckily, it never happened. And even in all the big contacts with the amount of guys that we killed, etc., we had very, very few casualties. It was normally a malaria or something like that. So we were very lucky. I know that the 901 and 904 guys had huge contacts. Also had the unenviable position of having tanks chase us. So we drove into a couple of tank ambushes, and then they come racing out the bush. And when they do that, you end up riding around in circles behind them to try and get behind them so that you can get a Ratel 90 to get around in the back. And they talk about apocalypse now. You got a Casspir riding, the aerials are flat against the back. You got the troops standing on top. They're all throwing smoke grenades, rifles out, ready to try and shoot anything. You got the commander on top shooting with a pea shooter at a tank. And you've got this guy always trying to circle you around so they can give you a 105mm gun round at you. When those big things go off, I mean, it's just a big yellow flash, and everybody's just starts screaming, really, for want of a better description. So we had that several times. We were placed on the high ground. I forget the name, but the Viposto, if I remember correctly, is right. And in Helmut Holger Reitman's book, he writes up about the Fapla Brigade that attacked us there. So what we'd done, we'd been on an operation. We got into this piece of high ground. We staked it out. We left a whole lot of troops behind, and we went on a 101 battalion patrol. So we didn't walk in formations with two sections up front and one behind and all that. The way we used to hunt the tours all the time was you just had this gaggle of guys, and you'd have some flankers who'd be watching out for the spur on the side, and a whole lot in the middle who were watching the spur in the middle. So we went out for a walk to do a bit of a patrol along this river. And I'll take a photograph if I remember. There was a map that they put out about it and send it to you. But we walked along the river. We got to a spot where the MRLs of ours had shot and broken it up, and it was unbelievable. I mean, you had an area that was about 40 meters by 100 meters that had nothing left in it. Nothing. No trees, no bush, no scrub, no grass, ball bearings all over the place. So those MRLs are something serious. So we carried on. We finished the patrol. We didn't really find any Fapla, which was what we've been hoping to do. And we turned around and went back. We're sitting up on the high ground. It's fairly late in the evening, and I'd been out in the front of the lines. I believe that the easiest place to go for a dump was in front of your troops, because then if anything happened, you had all the firepower behind you. You weren't sitting at the back on your own. So I went out, did my business, sat down, had my R4 with a 50-round magazine, sit in there, watch the world go by, close the hole, go back into the lines, sit down. I'm starting to brew up my cup of coffee for the night. And next thing, whammo, out come the rounds. The Fapla Brigade attacked us. and they shot the shit out of us. What was really interesting was we had a whole element of golf company from 3-2 Battalion who was with us. So we had our Casspirs, which were already loaded with extra people because I only had 3 Casspirs and the Quail, and then all the other teams had their Casspirs set up. And these guys all bounced into our Casspirs as well. So my Caspir was by this stage carrying about 35 guys, plus all of them Sheilas, the big packs that they carried, and the Quail's full of them. And I'm sitting on top here, and I've got this Ratel guy, Ratel 90 from 3-2 on my right side. And he's looking out at this, and he's now stuck on a tree because he panicked and tried to reverse out of it, and he's got the Ratel stuck on a tree. So I'm firing with the 5.0 and trying to keep these guys away from us. And this youngster's stuck on the tree now. I'm trying to talk to him on the radio and say, hey, listen, just calm down, put it in forwards, go forwards a little bit, reverse, and he'll pop it off the stump. Oh, man, he wouldn't listen. I jumped off. I can tell him, hey, this is what you got to do. So he does it. Climb back on the Caspir. These guys are shooting the shit out of us. There were some tanks in the background, but they didn't come forward. And if they had, they'd have caught us. So this guy eventually gets off. I'm the last Caspir in this area. Duval and the other guys have withdrawn to another position because there was a huge force that was attacking us. I mean, the front was probably 500 meters wide and there were soldiers everywhere. So Duval's calling him on the radio. He said, Peter, where are you? Where are you? I said, no, I'm still here. I was helping one of the Ratels that was stuck on a tree. He says, man, you better get out of there because that's a whole brigade that's come to get us. So just get on your bus and move. So my Casper's grinding through the sand. We eventually go and catch up with him. He says, what took you so long? I said, well, this guy was stuck on the tree. What do you want me to do? Leave him behind? Oh, okay. So we finished that. We went to Major TV for the night, and that was basically what happened. Right at the beginning, when we got to the Lomba, Major Nortman had a Ratel which had sat-nav in it. So if you remember right, you having been in the Air Force, sat-nav, the satellites only went over 2 or 3 times a day if you were lucky in those parts of the world. So we go out on the first night with Major Nortman, and he's behind this sat-nav Ratel, and I'm behind him, and we're driving along. And eventually, after the 3rd time, we passed the same tree and the same shore, and I said to him, man, Major, there's something wrong here. Why are we not getting to where we're going? He said, Peter, can you do a better job? I said, I can. Let me assure you. And I became the navigator for Combat Group Bravo all that time. And every night we had to go somewhere. So there we're going. So I get in front, my Caspir, my troops, off we went. And we'd always get to the right place at the right time. It was an interesting time. One of the days we worked at night. So you drive at night. So the MiGs can't catch you. And then in the daytime, you go into your fish rod and your fishbone, and then you camo your Caspers and put your camo nets out, and you sleep under them all day, and then start at night again. So one of the days we were driving along, and the troops all said, "Hey, Lieutenant, this is bullshit. We keep on having to dig trenches every bloody night, and we never use them. So today we're not digging trenches." I said, "No, that's fine. I got no problem. You know, if something happens, something happens." So we sit down. Me and Duval and Dan and a couple of guys are sitting in Duval's Caspir, and we sit in there talking shop. That's what you do. There's nothing else to do all day. And we're talking nonsense to each other. And the next minute, a MiG flies over us. And the next minute, a second one comes immediately behind him. And I looked up. I could see the guy. He had a red helmet on with like a white thing and a white star on the side of the helmet. So I said to Val, I said, "No, Val, we've got cuck. This guy's going to come back. He's seen something." And lo and behold, this arsehole came back and he dropped a 500-pound bomb about 40 meters away from us. So we're all sitting there in the Caspir watching this. And I said, "He's coming back." And they're all listening. I said, no, he's not coming back. Next minute, there comes the jet. Damn, he drops the bomb. The parachute jumps out. I said to them, "Fuck, guys, we better run because you're going to get hurt today." So we all scramble out and we lie behind the Caspir underneath, behind the wheels, so that you've got some form of protection because we haven't got any trenches that day. Well, that bomb went off. After that, troops never argued about digging a trench again. They were just, that was what they did. So yeah, we had a good time. Robbie Hartsleaf was in charge of the combat group Bravo. Hannes Nordman was in charge of the Ratels and the 101 Battalion Infantry that was with it. And then they had the 3-2 Battalion Infantry that was part of the setup as well. We got sent to look after the G5s. The one time, that was terrible because you park your Casspirs in like an all-round defense in front of them, so that the FAPLA guys wouldn't catch them unawares. And then they'd sit there and they'd shoot all night. And when they shot, the dust jumped out of everything, out of your hair, out of your overalls, out of your radios, out of your rifles. It was terrifying. You couldn't get any sleep. So they fire all night. And then when we get told the next night, right, you got to move, you got to go somewhere else, we've not slept for 2 days. It was interesting. Those gunners had a hard time, but they also did a great job of looking after us, as did the SA Air Force for Kazavacking guys and all that. Anyhow, Robbie Hartsleaf one day to the orders turns around and he says to me, to all of us 101 officers, we're all sitting there, we've got nice long beards. I mean, my beard was close on yours, Fossey. And I'm sitting there and he looks at all of us and he says, man, you guys stink. You smell to high heaven. So we look at him and say, Commandant, you know why that is? He says, no, why? I said, because all your national service troops in 6-1 and 6-2 and all the other national service troops that are around in the artillery and all that are getting water before us. And by the time the water bunkers get to us, there's enough for us to fill our Casper tank and our water bottles, and we can brush our teeth. So he looks at us and says, no, that's BS. So no, you come and sit with us the next time. He didn't come and sit with us, but he believed us. And eventually he organized and we got some water. We got there on the 26th of September. 55 days later was the first time any of us had a bath. 55 days. So we smelled a lot. I was lucky because I always took 2 pairs of shorts, PT shorts, T-shirts underneath, 2 T-shirts, and I had 4 pairs of socks. So I rotated the socks all the time and didn't have to wash them. But we smelled very healthy. One of the pictures that you see, that one with me and Dan sitting together, and then a whole group of bearded guys. Deval's the one on the right with the cap on his head. Is one of the troops who's buying Vos and fresh meat. That was the first time we got fresh meat, and I think that was around probably halfway through November of us being there. So about around the 55-day mark where we had a bath. First beer, first meat. And we were all sitting there talking shop. You can see all the pictures. There's Dan van Rensburg in there, Vessie's in there, Val's in there, Chris Damas is in there, Peter Cordier, one of the young lieutenants who was in 902 was sitting there. Donnie van Wyk was in there. Whole lot of guys. So you can just see from that. And it was a great bond. I mean, everybody would do anything for anybody to help anyone out. So that was pretty an awesome part of having done the soldering. And I think that's what kept me in it, was I had so much variety. I did some training, a lot of operations, recce selection, having done the Rhodesian one, having done deployments in Rhodesia. One of the things to talk about, we wrote books of the officers who served with the RAR. So I sent you 2 book covers, Chibaya Moyo 1 and Chibaya Moyo 2. Chibaya Moyo 1 you can get from the Rhodesian African Rifles Association in the UK. You just Google that and you'll find an address. And if you need it, you can tell me, I'll give it to you. So you buy that from them, and that money goes to ex-RAR soldiers who are in Zimbabwe who've been abandoned by all accounts. And then Chibaya Moyo 2 is on Amazon, so you can go and find it there. Part of that also goes to RAR troops, and it was written by all the Rhodesian officers of the experiences they had with African officers. So I think I have 3 or 4 articles in that. I also know that Deval is busy writing a 101 Battalion book, so we're going to put a whole lot together on that, especially on the Romeo Mikes, because of the way the concept worked and how it was. I think the experience in the East was really interesting. One of the days, one of my Romeo Mikes 6 troops, he was one of the older troops in the platoon. So it was a pretty young platoon, but he was one of the older ones who'd been posted in there. And he got the zig with something I told him. So I said to him, come, we're going to go and speak to Lieutenant Deval. And I didn't have a pistol with me, and I didn't have my rifle in my hand. So we started walking, and this cowboy cocks his rifle behind my back. Well, I thought, well, I'm going to get a 50-round magazine today because I've done something wrong. Anyhow, I walk up and we get to Deval's Casper, and he's quite angry with the troops, and he grabs this rifle out of this guy's hand. And I told him, Val, in English, I said, Val, this guy's rifle's cocked and there's a round in it, let me tell you. He says, he cocks it, and the thing flew out and dropped somewhere, but he hadn't seen it come out. And he says, no, Peter, there wasn't. I said, there was. Let me assure you, I don't tell stories. Anyhow, we took Timotheus away, and I said to him, Timotheus, don't ever do that again, because if you do, I'll shoot you. He got the message, but he turned into a pretty good troop at the end. So you had those sort of experiences. We did the final, what they call the jumping a gallop in early December, raced through to try and chase them off the minefields and all that there, and that didn't really work out. And eventually, I think on around the 18th of December, we were told, you guys can go home. So I said, no, okay, that's fine. So Naval, of course, gives me the crap job. He says, Peter, he says, you can bring all the sick and lame vehicles with you. You bring all the Casspirs that have got center bolts that are shared. You can bring all the Querfels with all the diesel leaks and oil leaks and all the stuff. And you bring the recovery vehicles with you. So the rest of us are going. So they jump off and off they go, and they get to the Kavango River just outside Rundu. And there's this Deerhounds camp that they end up having to go through. They tell them, no, we don't do this stuff. We're regular soldiers. We don't need to be taught about saying prayers and all that stuff afterwards. And told to forget our bad dreams. So they race through and they get onto the Kavango River, and of course they get into Rundu and buy a shed load of beer and meat, and all the guys are sitting on there. So you'll see a picture of me sitting on a tree stump in the middle of the Kavango River with them. Anyhow, I'm 2 days behind them. And I thought, no, Deval, this is not fair. You're not going to catch this one on me. So I made the guys drive, and we just drove all day and all night. Anytime a vehicle broke, we fixed it and hooked it up behind another recovery and drove it down. And we arrived there just as they were about to start buying, and the beer was pouring out. He looks at me and says, how did you get here? I said, no, you just leave things to me. I can get things done. So we stopped there. We had a night there, finished what we were doing. And there's another photo in there of 2 photos joined together where the whole convoy going to Rundu. So we drove back from Quito to go back to Ondangwa via Rundu. So off we go, and we head to Grootfontein. And in Grootfontein at the Deerhounds camp, we pull in there, and there's a whole Parabat company there. And the Parabats thought they were really clever. So because we've got African troops, I think they can all bullshit us and steal the rations and all that. Anyhow, Chris Dahmers and Vesey caught on to this, and they blitzered those Paras something horrible. They didn't know what hit them. And it was a matter of our troops fight with us. They look after us. They make us, keep us well. You don't ever steal from us. That's how it is. So that Deerhounds camp and those Paras, I'll never forget that, I don't think. And there were probably about 20 of them that got really beaten up that night, quite badly. Anyway, we then tripped back to Ondangwa, 20th of December, 21st, we get there, walk in, and as usual, it's cold showers and etc. We unbomb and take all the weapons off the vehicles, clean them up, wash them, park them in, told right, you can go home for Christmas. So we all boot off and head off for Christmas. And that was an awesome time. The camaraderie and the friendship. When we came back on our 10 days, we'd sit in the pub there. Colonel Velgenwood was really good. Orison Skitter was fantastic. Julia Kilo, Yaku Kriya, Commandant, he was the 2IC. He was a good guy. There were a lot of good majors, a lot of good captains in there. And they knew what we did, and they understood what we did. So when we came back, we'd just go and buy as much alcohol as possible to keep you entertained for a day or two, and that's what we did. So I only drink beer, and I'd go and buy 2 cases of beer for the night, and the other guys would go and buy 2 liters of rum or whatever it was, and some 2-liter Coke if they were lucky, and some ice. We sat there and talked nonsense until the next morning, and then cleaned up, fixed vehicles. It was an awesome time. When Captain Rademacher got his initiation, that night the guys got really naughty and burnt 2 of the palm trees down on the road coming into from the gate going in towards where the LWT was. So the next morning, after I'd had too many beers, I'm the one who volunteers to go and tell Colonel Velgenwood what happened. And he usually said to me, Peter, I understand what you guys do. He says, don't do it again, get out of here. So it was a good time. He was a very good boss, very, very good man. And what a great unit to work in. I don't know if anyone knows, but they eventually had 2,900 members of 101 Battalion. There were probably about 420, 450 in the Romeo Mikes teams. And then all the others were out on company bases as interpreters, etc., etc. So it was a really good unit. Lasted 10 years. Did a great job in April of 89 when the SWAPO guys infiltrated. Anyway, going now to January of 1988. I was then told by the colonel for my sins that I was now in charge of 903, which was Reg van Rooyen's old company. So call signs for all of us were your initials at the end of the day. So Duval was Delta Whiskey, John Lombard was Papa Lima, but that was because Juliet Lima, one of the majors, already had that call sign. Says Prinsloo was Sierra Papa, Manikis Furi was Mike Fox, Arthur Novel was Alpha November, I was Golf Bravo. And the reason for that was I wasn't going to be a PB. I wasn't a Plaaslikable Falcon. So GB was my call sign. I sent you a picture of the Caspar. I sent you a picture of me on top of Golf Bravo with Duval next to me and Chris Dahmers next to him when we were getting a diesel supply run. So January of 88, we go out, and it's now the Insapelin, the infiltration, where the Typhoon tours are all coming through. You've got the rain, they've got water, they can hop and skip, they can walk through the water, so we can't find spoor. And we spend our time out near Muppa, cross-tracking, checking spoor, etc. I'd arranged to get married on the 20th of February, which is my wife's birthday. So I can't get into trouble any time in my whole lifetime, because if I forget her birthday, I forgot the anniversary as well. So I'm set to get married on the 20th of February. And we were out there running up and down, chasing down spoor, shooting tours. And we had one particularly bad contact where 4th of February, Michael McCann was killed. Michael was a young lieutenant. His dad was in the Air Force Reserve. Dennis McCann, very nice guy. I connected with Dennis after Michael was killed quite a lot. And Michael was running Romeo Mikes 6. We had 903 and 902 together. So you had teams Romeo Mike 5, 6, 7, and 8, which was Duval's teams, and then 9, 10, 11, and 12, which were my teams in 903. And we were following some spoor that we found. There were 15 guys in the spoor, set of spoor that we found. They were all Typhoon tours. And we were following after them early. One morning we found the spoor. By 9 o'clock, we'd hit the first bomb Z. The trackers were in Casspirs back, so Duval was in front behind the trackers. So Duval took them back. I went in front. Michael was just in front of me in 6, Romeo Mike 6 Caspar. And we got to the edge of Oshona, and I said to Michael, you stop here and you wait. And I told him in English. He was an Englishman from Durban, so English should have been his mother tongue. And he says to me, no, Lieutenant, the troops say it's good, we can go. I said, no, Michael, I worked with you guys in the East. They are rookies. They don't know what they're doing yet. You wait. Stop on the side of the Shona. Anyhow, he didn't stop, and I drove into the Shona. When I write a book, I'll put a map in of what happened and where it was in the Shona, etc. And if you want it, I can give it to you. But he drives into the Shona, and of course, the tours had run right around an anthill and left around another one, and along the top edge of the Shona. And they got into an L-shaped line in the ambush, and he drove straight into it. They shot him in the head, blew his head off with an RPG-75. It hit the corner of the gun platform in front of him, the 3 Brownings. Took his head off. He dropped through to the floor. Another RPG went in underneath the window, gunner's machine gun. You'll see a picture that I sent to you. That went through and hit Michael in the legs as he was falling. And the other guy who was killed on the Caspar was Mark Suter, who was the engineer sapper who was with us sitting on the back on the tail. So the tours always targeted the white guys because they knew that was the leadership element generally. Anyhow, they shot the crap out of that Caspar. It was hit 5 times with RPG-75s. They shot the T-case out in the middle using a PKM. They killed Mark at the back using a PKM. There were 11 November troops in that Caspar. Every one of them got out. The only guy that had a little bit of shrapnel was the window gunner. Every other one was not scratched at all. Anyhow, his Caspar's now parked there. The troops are jumping out to debus and get around the back of it so they're not getting shot at. And I had Mike 12 Alpha on my right side on the side of the Shona. And I said to him, he was a sergeant, I forget his name. I said, come, you got to drive in the Shona with me. He stayed there. He stayed on the side of the Shona, and I drove into the Shona. And in my Golf Bravo, Caspar had a 5.0 and a 3.0 and a window gunner with a 3.0. And then I only carried a few guys with me. So I had a guy who was my Batman like. And then I had 2 corporals with me that day, Jan Skuman and Frans Spies, also both excellent guys. So I drove in, and I'm standing right behind 6, Romeo Mikes 6, which is now idling, and a bit of smoke coming out of it from the RPGs and so on. The troops are all taken a run now because they saw me coming, so they knew they had some covering fire. And I shot the guys in the left-hand side of the L first, using the 5.0 and the 3.0. I killed the medic there. I shot another guy's watch off his hand. He had a Mickey Mouse watch on. We found it as we were doing the follow-up afterwards. And then on the right side of the ambush, I shot another guy in the chest, and I killed another one. And the guy we shot in the chest was the lieutenant. So they then gatted and they ran, and we tried to follow the spoor. That's where we found the little Mickey Mouse watch on the way. But they had about 15 kilometers, and they were in the Fapla base in Mortar. So we couldn't catch them by that stage. And those Typhoon guys are fast. You know, they can walk 100 kilometers a night to wherever they're going, and they're carrying 80 kilograms of kit. It's unbelievable what they can do. Anyhow, we get this guy eventually. We stripped all the others. You'll see the RPG 75s and the SKS and the grenades that were lying there from the guys that we'd shot and killed and wounded. And then we took this wounded guy, and for the night, me and the ex-Rhodesian troops and some of the SWAPO tours who were at 101 sat down and interrogated him, because the tours all spoke English, because they knew that the Afrikaans guys wouldn't speak English. So we spent the night interrogating him, and eventually, I'm not sure if he died or he was casevaced. I think they casevaced him, and then he died. He had a couple of holes in his lungs, so we put plastic over it, and we had more and more. So that was quite an interesting contact. So once that was finished, we had a few other follow-ups, but not really much happened in February. And as we got closer to the 20th of February, we had a guy with malaria, and then we had another one who'd been crushed against a quail, and another two with malaria. And you probably know him, John Church. So Commandant Church was at the base at Ondangwa for the Air Force. And every night when the Pumas came in to come and take the Casawacs or the casualties away, Lieutenant Baxter, you're not getting on that helicopter. I said, why? I'm going to get married. What's your problem? No. You're not getting on that helicopter. And every time it was, you tell Lieutenant Baxter he's not going. So we'd organized it already, and I had Romeo Mikes 7 bomb geared up and ready with me, with Golf Bravo, to drive back to Ondangwa so I could catch a commercial flight, so I could at least get to Cape Town on the Friday before I got married. Anyhow, I think it was the Wednesday night. Eventually, they conceded that I could get in the helicopter. And the worst thing, it was the fullest that night of all of them. You know, all the ones before had been empty. That night, I had to stand up against the extended range fuel tank on top of it to catch the flight back. You know, I got back. It then cost me 750 Rand to catch a flight. So they got me to Windhoek. I flew Windhoek to Cape Town, and I finally got married on the 20th. I went back. I went to 903 again after my honeymoon. And that was a good time as well. We ended up on the road on Jiva to Zangongo again, 106s on the Casspirs. Unfortunately, a young guy called Corporal Yeo, Y-E-O, a sapper, killed himself while we were on there. So what we'd done, there was a BRDM that had been shot out on the side of the road, or it was still standing on the road in those days. I see it's off the road now. And at the BRDM, the only places the vehicles could go, we would lay 2 SA-8 anti-tank mines every night. So if they crept through at night, they were going to get a fat surprise. Anyhow, Yo went out the one morning to go and disarm it. And we were about 200 meters from it. And the next thing here, you just hear this almighty bang. And he'd obviously hit the anti-lift device instead of disarming it. And it went bang. So all the troops said, oh, Lieutenant, there's a real problem. So, yeah, we better go and look, see. And we arrived there. All we could find of him was the left-hand buckle of his web belt, which is the one which had the hole in it, and the heel of his left-hand boot. That was it. Everything else was gone. Nothing left at all. Big hole in the road. He was a good youngster. It was a pity he died like that. Anyhow, we sat and we did that for a little while. We went to Anjiva. We used to take the 106s that we had on the Casspirs and sit outside the defenses on the north side where the airfield was. And then we would take the flechette rounds. And I did 106 in Rhodesia, so that was a pretty cool weapon to use. And the little youngster they'd sent, he didn't know really how to use it. So I taught him what to do. And we would bounce the flechette rounds off the sand in front of the trenches so that all the 7,200 pieces of flechette would then bounce around in the trenches where they were. That was damn good fun, actually. There was another time where Sace Prinsloo had hooked up with me when I was with 902 with Val, or when Val was away, and we were ambushing the same road, but we were on the eastern side of the road that time, and we were on a hill watching, and there was a Gaz that came along, and he had a 14.5 on top, and they started probe shooting. So I decided, no, this is BS. I'm going to go and take this guy on. So we jumped in the Casspir, we raced down and get onto the tarmac. And by the time we got there, the air and the dust at the back was a 14.5 with its Gaz racing away from us. So we had a lot of fun around that area of the world. My first night in Angola with 101 Battalion, I remember we'd driven up north of Anjiva that Monday night, and we went and laid an ambush on the road right there, where the Fatla defenses were, a couple of 100 yards up the road. And you had the MAG gunners lined up and everything ready in case someone came or moved. But it was a real entertaining part of the world, and a great experience, and what great camaraderie from speaking and dealing with those guys. So my military career came to an end in May of 1988 when my contract was up. I'd got married, so my wife was also didn't really want me to come back in 2 pieces or no pieces at all. And it wasn't for her, it was me who made the decision and said, no, I think it's time to move on and do something else. So that's really what happened. Civilian life-wise, I've been blessed. I've got 2 sons. My oldest boy, Byron, works for a bank here in Ohio, about 50 miles from where I live. I live in Angola, Indiana. There's 101 lakes around here. It's a really nice little part of the world. At least we have electricity every day. Everything works. The mail works. It's a little bit late sometimes and all that, but otherwise good. The politicians are not great, but they leave us alone generally. And I've lived and worked in 32 different countries around the world so far. My scaffold career started in 1988, and I've been all over India, China, Australia, New Zealand, UK, Europe, you name it, Africa, quite a few countries. So, Fosi, to you and Koos, really, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for allowing us to speak and put this on the record, because I believe that it's actually the duty of all the young guys who have a story to tell it, because with the woke generations now, they don't want to learn about this. They don't want to understand what happened. They don't want to see what it is, and they don't read books either. So at the end of the day, how do you get this across? And if you look at it, how did the Indians get their story through the world in America? They got it through folklore, through telling stories every night. How did the Avambas get it through? Same thing. How did all the African tribes get it through? How did the Afrikaners get it through? How did the English people in certain different parts of the world do it? So I think it's a really important thing that you guys are doing, and I appreciate it. And like I said, when I did the Fighting Men of Rhodesia one, if I think of anything else, I'll bring it up. And if you want me to, I'll do a second interview. Like I can talk, right? What have we been here now? About an hour and a quarter? You give me a few beers, or I can get it even longer if you want. But it's been a great experience. And for you guys to take the initiative and put this out and get it on the air, I think it's magnificent. If you don't mind, if you send me the link sometime, I'll put it up on our 101 Battalion Facebook site and various others for people to see and hear, because there's a lot of those guys who should tell you their stories. I mean, Deval, he's an excellent man. I mean, you probably know he's head of Protea Coin. He's done a lot in terms of the armed robberies and all that in South Africa. He's a super skilled tactician. I mean, he uses a Protea Coin helicopter and SAP helicopters like Fire Force. So he's sharp. He's a good guy. He might be someone to get hold of. Dan van Rensburg, Sace Prinsloo, if he talked to you. John Lombard, he's a good guy. His dad served in the SADF for many, many years. So John's another good guy. Manikis Fourie, Rhodesian, he's also a good guy, the ex Mike Fox commander. He's a good bloke, but he's a bit of a needs some help in telling him where to talk and what not to say. Otherwise, good guys. Arthur Norval, Dan, Chris Damas, there's a lot of them. Vesey van der Westhuizen is a good guy as well. Gideon Venter, he's another national service who just signed on PF eventually. Good bloke. A lot of really good people who were at 101 and great time. 121 Battalion, there were a lot of good guys as well, So really, really interesting. A lot of people made great of their national service. For me, I decided to be a regular. I wanted to be a regular soldier. If Rhodesia had continued, I'd probably been a career soldier for 30 years. But that's just how life goes, you know. At the end of it, I would really appeal to all of them. Please tell your stories. You don't tell your story, no one's going to know what happened. No one's going to understand what our lives were like, what it was like being a young 17-year-old thrown into a conventional war, driving a Ratel. I mean, one of those young national service lieutenants who was with 3-2 with us in combat group Bravo in the armored squadron for 3-2. He, in one of the attacks, we were on the outside of a big Fatler base. The brigade was still entrenched. We drove up and attacked him, and this poor kid was so nervous. He was head inside the Ratel, finger on the trigger, Browning pointed in the air, and I shouted at him and screamed at him, and eventually almost had to jump off and go and hit him on the head and say, the only way you'll get out of this alive is by shooting back. It's the only way. If you stand there and you're scared and you're frightened, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So get off your ass and do some fighting. You know, if you can't, then tell your major, get moved. But it's super important that people come out and tell that story. Because, I mean, I don't know if you read David Mannell's books. David Mannell was one of the guys in 6-1 Mech when they got the bomb dropped on top of that Ratel and it blew up and killed all those guys. David was there. He wrote a book about it, something about this side of the Lomba or something. If you want it, I'll send you a photo of the cover of it. It's a great book. It's a great experience from a youngster who will tell you from day one to day end how it went and how they ended up in the Deergangs camp, which I disagreed with as well, because they were young national service guys who were trying to sort of de-stress them before they went through to go home when they were just demobbing 6-1 Mech. And he tells you of the boredom and lying in the tent and the Dominies talking to them and whatever. So it's a great experience for people to learn and read off that. Helmut Holmer Reitman's books, fantastic. Read that one, War in Angola. That's the one I was referring to about the attack on the hill. If you talk Fred Bridgeland, he did one, War in Africa. Again, another great book. I gave my one to Duval, which he'll hopefully give back to me one day. And I think that type of thing is what tells people how life is, how it was. Roland de Vries, all of his books are also fantastic. You know, they've got such detail and such interesting information. I'm not a mechanized guy. I far prefer the 101 type of operation. But I must tell you, it was really exciting reading his books. So again, from me to you, Fossey, and to Koos for the time and effort and energy you guys put in, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
This was you're fast and furious, and yeah, thank you very, very much. You sort of answered the one question that I had. Any regrets? You don't look like a regrets type of guy to me, but any regrets that you never got your operator's badge?
Always. There's always that regret. My youngest son is a U.S. Army Ranger, fully qualified, right? And he's a part of a special force. I regret that, yes. But I also think I made the right decision because I ended up going to 101 Battalion eventually, which was such an experience that I would not have got if I was with the Reckies, as an example.
Yeah, no, agreed with that. Now, talking of 101, okay, I'm going to put my hand up here and say, guys, I'm from the SAF. We flew and we slept in sleeping bags and occasionally. And we made sure that when the DAC came into land, wherever we were, that one of us was on the ground to make eye contact with the DAC loadmaster if there wasn't an engineer, so that one of the boxes of meat could go this way and a few cases of beer could go. We did it that way. We soft. So in other words, that's what I'm admitting to. But I'm learning so much. Every time I sit here and I sit in awe. I did this with my past. I shoved it into a tin can, and there I wanted to keep it. It was only until my grandkids started asking, were you really in the Air Force? Did you fly helicopters? When they started asking questions, I had to slowly but surely. But the worst what got to me was about 2 or 3 years ago. I had a yearning to hear a South African voice. But the yearning wasn't, I can phone anybody in South Africa. The yearning wasn't met until I started hearing comrades. I don't like using that word loosely, but guys that I had served with that understood camaraderie. Then the fulfillment came. And that's more or less why I'm talking far too much, but why I volunteered my hand to help Koos with a bit of editing. And now I'm sitting in this, I reckon, very enviable position that I'm chatting with guys like you, and I'm learning every time, and I'm learning, and I'm hearing you talk lightly of bravery, but what I want to get to here is I operated out of Ondangwa, I don't know how many times, how many bush tours out of Ondangs, and 101 operated there, and I know the insignia and I know everything, but I know nothing about 101 Battalion, and now I'm starting to. Now, what I'm also saying, there was quite an emphasis in this year. 3-2 are busy putting a coffee table book together. 3-1 are busy putting a book together. I've learned, but yeah, we sit with. I'm taking a wild shot here, and I will correct it if I'm wrong. But you're the first person from 101 Battalion that has spoken to us.
Well, I think, Fosi, that you're talking like you have will encourage a lot more guys to do it. So whilst I was a very small part of 101, I don't believe I was an insignificant part. I mean, I won a Medal of Honor there. I sent you a copy of it. December of 1987, Colonel Velkemoed calls me up. We're having a formal dinner. And I've, of course, had about 10 beers by this stage. And he says, no, Lieutenant Peter Baxter, come up here. Wow, what for? No, just for what you do and how you've done it and all that. And out of that 2,900 guys in that unit, only 162 of those were ever issued. Mine's number 82 or 87, 82, 87. You'll see it on there. But what also comes out is you asking guys to talk, and I'll ask them as well. I talk about it all the time. I believe that we should not keep our past quiet. For example, I went the other day in Miami for a global entry pass to get into America, which makes it easier and quicker to get through the passport queues when you travel overseas. And I sit down and the guy looks at me and he says, so you were born in Zimbabwe? I said, no, I wasn't. He said, no, I know it was Rhodesia. He said, but America won't say that it's Rhodesia from before. So in actual fact, my green card had Rhodesia as my birthplace. Anyhow, passport now says Zimbabwe. He sits there and he looks at me. He says, man, you can't get away from Africa. He says Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, South Africa, Southwest Africa, and then Angola, Indiana. So I burst out laughing. He says, how did you end up in Angola? I said, that's a funny story. When I got a job, I'd left my initial job in America, and I was given a job to run the Midwest for a scaffolding company called Brock. So when I got the job, they told me, no, you have to live in Detroit or Chicago. So I said, no, not happy with that idea. I have too many weapons to go and live in those two cities. So they won't let me in anyway. And number one. And number two, I'm not paying the property taxes. So they said, I said to them, do you mind if I live in the middle and I'll drive to each place? Otherwise, I'll be in an airplane all the time. Yeah, no, that's fine. So I go looking on the map, and my wife found the town of Angola. And she says to me, there's an Angola in Indiana. I said, oh, cool. So when we go traveling around looking for a place to live, let's go and stop there and see. We stopped there for a weekend. That was it. We've been nearly 6 years now. So that's how it works. You talk about the food and all that. We roughed it. I mean, my Casper Golf Bravo actually had a mat board in it, which had a mattress in it. So I was one of the cushy ones. But that was only in May, in 1988. In 1987, you slept on the floor, and that was it, what you did. But we were clever. We always had a bit of fresh meat because our troops used to go and capture boka from all the local farmers. If there was a kudu or something nearby, it got the shit shot out of it and got eaten. We always had long life milk. Deval will tell you a story one day, maybe. We were sitting around that February of 1988 after Michael McCann was killed. And I always used to take a few little tins of small prawn strips with me and rice. And I sat down and said, come, I'll cook you guys a meal today. And I cooked him shrimp on aromat rice. Well, he still raves about it today. Anytime I see him, he says, I'll never forget that day. Never, ever forget it. And I've got a photo of it somewhere, where I'm standing in a pair of shorts while we're doing the cooking. It's interesting stuff. And for you to get people to talk, I think your grandkids thing is very good. My son's like that. He wanted to join the army at the age of 5. He's now 6 years now. He's been an Army Ranger. And he's good at what he does and he loves it. And he said it came from you talking. And he said from all your photo albums that you had at home, Rhodesian ones, South African ones, and the 101 Battalion ones. So that all comes out. And if you can get them to understand it, they'll tell their children as well. And people will eventually realize that we weren't just a little pimple on the earth. We actually did a whole lot, which taught a whole lot of people. And another thing to mention, there's a colonel here in America who wrote a book called The Art of War. Not a book, but a thesis. As part of their staff course, they have to do it. And he wrote it when he was a major about the Rhodesian African Rifles and how it was the regiment that was prime above everything else. It was like 101 Battalion and 121. The regiment was more important than anything else. You could have mixed people. At 101, there were ex-SWATFers, there were ex-UNITA guys, there were ex-FAPLA guys, there were Rhodesian troops, there were Vambos, all mixed into that pot. In 121 Battalion, you had the Zulus and ex-Rhodesians being Shishona and Ndebele. So you have a whole lot of these mixes and what makes the thing so right. So that Art of War papers, I'll send it to you if you want to read it. Major Stewart wrote it, and he's written another book of it afterwards called After Ntambani, which was when the RAR was used by Mugabe to quell his opposition in 1981. And it's a fantastic writing. And what he says the American Army still, unfortunately, hasn't learned that it is the unit that you create. It is not the people of one tribe or another that is what creates that unit. It's the unit that creates itself. And I think that's super important. And, from me to you, as an Air Force guy, you guys did a great job backing us up. If we needed a gunship or we needed anything, we had that luxury, which was really cool. And it was only when we were in the east that we couldn't get it in the daytime because of the air superiority that the MiGs had, that we lacked it. But you were always great to us, and the same in Rhodesia. Anyone who was on a chopper would lay down their lives for the guys on the ground because they knew what we did. That was how it was. So like you, I appeal to everybody, please. And again, as I said to you earlier, as I think of other things, so you heard my Fighting Men of Rhodesia one. I'm going to do a second one because I left so much out of that in the talking. And there's so many other things that you can add and talk about, which create that experience for everybody. So to you and Chris, again, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, I must say I was a tad apprehensive before I started this because I from listening to that was maybe not the best thing that I could have done, but I wanted to prep myself. And I thought to myself, good golly gosh, this guy has been through so much in his life. Am I the right one? Have I the right to have a conversation with you, firstly?
You do. No, there's no shadow of doubt. Anyone does. It's also up to your children to have that conversation to ask, because remember, a lot of soldiers don't talk about what they had, what happened, where it was. I mean, you take 101, for example. The first weekend I was there, I took my own pistol with me. And that night, Giel Venter had way too many dops by that night. And he came cruising through the barrack room and he was giving me shit and all the rest. So I jumped out of bed and I put the 9mm out and I said, just F off and leave me alone. I'm here to sleep for the night. You can go and drink and all that. I'm not started with that yet. So you learn and you do things. And it's those experiences that you put out. Then you take it and he'll turn around and tell you. He'll say, and Deval, they'll say, if we wanted a guy to come and fight with us, there's one Englishman we know we can call it, and that's Peter Baxter.
I got a text somewhere, from somebody today, and you were called a scarp Engelsman. I now know why. I've experienced, and it's been a tremendous pleasure. And a thought dawned upon me. I don't know if you've seen one or two of the group discussions where 3 or 4 of 3-1 Battalion guys chatted. Why don't you drag a few of your friends in, and I'll just say, okay, tonight we've got, or today we've got 3 or 4. I don't think more than that works well. The dynamic is because they know, I'm leaving you, that's your homework. You go and get that together for us, and I will send out the Zoom links and whatever, and we chat about your days, and you tell it from your perspective. That'll be terrific. It will really, and we put 101 on the map, and 121 if you want to.
Yeah, and 121. I'll set it up. It'll take me a little while and again, like you said, a group chat would be really phenomenal. Another thing to tell you, I was so lucky in the units that I served in. Yes, I regret not becoming an operator with the recce's, but at the end of the day, the way it led and the way it did, my single only regret is that I never jumped out of an aeroplane. That's all, to be quite honest with you. I regret not becoming an operator, but the way the history's pushed me and run me through, I think that was probably a very good move for me. But the one regret is just not having jumped out of an airplane. And they tell me now I'm too fat to do it because I weigh 240 pounds.
You're light. You're light. Yeah, I don't see the desire. I don't understand that. But flyboys don't understand why the only time I ever jump out of an airplane is when it's firmly on the ground. That's when I jump out of it.
Once you've ended up walking 30 and 40 kilometers a night for weeks on end, then you'll know why you want to jump out of an aeroplane.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go say this to you again. Sorry, that's why I joined the Air Force. So we could fly there. And that's why I stayed on choppers. And that's why I stayed on LOs. Well, cool. we could probably sit here and chat all night. And thank you for the compliments. Much appreciated. I really, really, really enjoyed this chat. And yes, folk, the Legacy Conversations folk, you heard Peter. He's promised. Well, I won't say he's promised. He said, give us a bit of time. We'll put it together. I don't want to hold you to anything, but it'll be terrific. Let's put 101 on the map. Let's understand the ethic, and I got a glimpse of that ethic. You guys fought hard. Looks like you played harder, but you did it. You did it, and you back many of you to tell the tale, and let's get gathering the tale of the individuals. It'll be terrific.
My word is my bond. Don't you worry. You'll have it. It will happen.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Okay. And I'm going to say, as we always do here on Legacy Conversations, until we meet again, God bless.
And to you. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.